The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 274 for October 4th, 2023. I'm not your host, Chris Webster, but I'm recording the intro because nobody on the podcast did. On today's show, we talk about what makes a CRM project go wrong, or a podcast. I don't know, probably just a project. So get ready to go in the field, then go right back home instead because this is CRM, and the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now.
Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 274. It's crazy to think about the fact that it's 274. I'm going to be the host today. Chris is actually sailing the Aegean Sea, and I don't know if he was inspired by the most recent Indiana Jones film, if that's the reason why he's on a cruise in the checking out ancient sites or something like that. But I'll be the host today. I'm along with my companions. The whole California crew is here. Heather.
Hi, everyone.
Oh my gosh, I blanked out, my friend. Your name is not host.
Stanley. And the other host, Andrew. Yeah,
Andrew, my God, I am ruining this thing. What a joke.
See, you know, these UC professors, dude. These UC no, dude, we're keeping it.
No, I blanked out and looked and it says host and I'm just like, and we're here with, oh gosh, Andrew.
Dude, I do that all the time. I do it like I'm worse. I guarantee I'm worse than you with names.
This is what happens when you just, if you're listening to this is what happens when you just read what's in front of you. Use your brain, you're supposed to read between the lines. Boy, oh boy. Holy cow.
Dude, I joke, but I lose my mind with names every day of my life. I'm terrible. So like, I deserve this. Like,
Andrew Kinkella, apologies about that. Blinking out. Your name's not host.
I'll deal with this somehow.
This is the number one step of how a CRM project can go wrong.
Yeah.
You don't remember the names of the people you're in the field with.
You don't need to know everyone's background, but you should know their name. Yeah.
Archaeologist number one. Archaeologist number two.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man.
Our topic today is how do archaeology projects go wrong, right? And so I had an original idea, but now my idea has changed after an exercise I did with my students this last week. I found it really interesting, probably more than any other exercise I've done with students before. We had a smoke day, so I couldn't actually go out and do the thing that I had planned. So rather, I pivoted and had an in-class exercise where I divided up my class into 3 different roles and had them take on different personas that are connected to positions in cultural resources companies. And so we had quite a while. We had 3 hours. It was a lab class that we were supposed to be outside, and because of the smoke, we couldn't be outside. So I had plenty of time for folks to work through this thing. And I split the class up into some common positions at CRM companies. So a third of the class took on the position of principal investigator. And the whole idea was that they were going to plan a short one-day survey and that they would have to travel from Southern California all the way to Northern California. And they, the plan was to have one day out in the field and then one travel day back. And that the PIs were making these arrangements for 1 crew chief and 4 field techs. And so they weren't digging, they were just going up there, and they knew that there was possibly the remains of a farmstead, not a big site, but it was within a large parcel, right? So the idea was they're going to drive from Southern California one day, stay in a hotel, go to the project area, do the survey, record the site. There's 5 people, they're all skilled, so they were told that, their crew chief has a master's and a couple years of experience, and their field techs had a year or 2 experience. They'd done field school, and they had some, time in cultural resources. And so it was like, you were going to have your pretty journeyman, intermediate level crew that was going to be out there doing this. And we had plenty of information, right? So I told them that it was a time and materials contract. They just had to figure out how much it was going to cost to get the people up there and keep them there. And then, that they would just submit that budget to the client, right? The client just wanted to get it done. So then I had a third of the class split up into crew chiefs, and I told them their position was to manage the project, get it done. They were going to be told how many hours they had to do it and how many folks they had working with them. And that was just what was going to happen. It was going to be a day up from Southern California, Northern California, do the survey, and then back, right? And they'd have 4 people that would be working with them. And they got a map of the project area too. So interestingly, this is a space that I'd already gone with students before. It's in a regional park. And so I just, didn't show them where existing sites were, but just had a polygon on a Google Earth thing that they could, measure out transects and set it up. And there's roads in there so they could decide how they're going to get access to the area. And I told them all about that. And then I told them they had to set up the lodging and, get their crew ready. And then the final third were the field techs. And so they were supposed to have all the concerns of a field tech. And I told them that they're, working their way up in cultural resources. They've been doing it a year or so, and they've done several projects, and that they were going to be the ones who would be recording the site, walking the transects, identifying artifacts, and all those kind of things. So for the first 10 minutes or so, the groups all started to work forward, right? So the field techs are kind of like, where is this place? They're looking on the map, and they're kind of like, where are we going to stay at? Or is the motel going to have breakfast? Like, do we have to drive our own cars? Are we going to get gas money? How's this whole thing working? What time are we leaving? How many hours are we out there, right? So they're thinking those kind of questions. And I was telling them, write a list of those things that you want to know so that you can ask your crew chiefs. They're the ones who are figuring that out. The crew chiefs want to know how much money they have to work with so they can make these decisions, right? And so they're trying to figure those kind of things out too. How are they going to get people there? Do they have to rent a truck? Where are they going to stay at? They're working through those kind of things, along with how huge is this area? How many hours will it take? Like, is this way out there? Are there any other concerns? Can I learn more about the project there? So they've got all these questions, and then the principal investigators are thinking, they start initially adding it up and calculating for all the people to come from Southern California up here. And then they start realizing, if we just hired local people, we wouldn't have to pay for a truck or per diem or motel or anything. So we're just going to find people on the internet that are archaeologists and just have them work the project. And we're not going to, hire anyone from the company, and it'll save us thousands of dollars. So these are undergrads who haven't done cultural resources before. But interestingly, you can see their thought patterns are already the same things that constantly are going on in CRM folks' minds, right? Okay, so after a few minutes, I go, well, everybody's got these questions and concerns. So let's go ahead. Let's just, ask each other. And so the field techs are saying, are we going to have per diem? Do we get mini fridges? Like, do I have to drive my own car? How's this whole thing going to work out? And the crew chiefs are saying, okay, well, I'll ask the supervisor, but yeah, seriously, are we going to get per diem? What's going on? And the people who are the principal investigators are like, yeah, we calculated that we just wouldn't have any of you work here. We're just going to hire project hires from the area, and that's it. So yeah. So then the crew chiefs are looking like, well, do I have a job? I mean, what's going on? The field techs are already moving on. Okay, sweet. I'm just going to apply somewhere else. Project's over. Class is over. No. So then I would go, I had to change the rules and say, you have to include people from your company. Otherwise, you won't have a company. And even though you can get contracts and I didn't tell them this, but I was like, even though you can just totally get contracts and then take a few $1,000s and subcontract it out to a real company for this exercise, also so the class lasts more than 40 minutes, I want you to assume that you're going to employ your own actual employees and have them do the project. So once I said that, then the plans went back to what they were doing before. They start making the calculations of how much it's going to cost. Then folks move forward and they say, oh, you're going to get paid. The field techs were going to get paid $25 an hour. The crew chief was going to get paid $35 an hour. Now, of course, these are folks coming from Southern California. People across the country are listening to this like, oh my God, don't spit your coffee out. This is Southern California. I don't know what true salaries are in Southern California, but I think that $25 an hour is probably on the low end of an entry level, and it would still not be easy to survive in Southern California. And I know that, the rate for the
it can be lower than that, Bill.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, 25 is somebody who has some experience.
What about the,
although that's starting to inch
crew
up.
chief?
It all depends. I mean, what kind of crew chief do you need? You have all different levels of crew chief. So sometimes your crew chief, and you know what? Sometimes if that crew chief has worked for the company, and again, please don't everybody start writing nasty letters. I'm not saying that this is the right thing. I'm just telling you that if the crew chief is a full-time employee with the company, they get an opportunity for a raise once a year, typically. Yeah. And so their amount, I mean, you see it all the time. It happens in every business. People that come in, the newest hires are usually many times making more money than the people that have been there a long time because they negotiated. They had an opportunity to negotiate their pay. So, field directors can be all over the place. And I have a few, I'm going to let you finish because I have a few things. Like, I'm sure there are companies that handle it this way. I don't handle projects this way, but I think it is important for your students to understand that it can go this way, but I would also like to provide an alternative.
Yeah.
So they don't think that all CRM companies or all environmental companies work this way. They don't.
Yeah, because yes. So I mean, a little bit of foreshadowing. Folks will turn into the all the worst trope, as we shall soon see. Yes. So I'm glad to know that the price ranges aren't so incredible that I once again, like I said, I was putting this thing together after my actual day was canceled. I needed to figure something out, right? So
I think you did a pretty good job.
Yeah. All right, this was the figure out. This was the pivot. This was my backup.
That's
exercise.
A good mid range. Yeah, good mid range.
Yeah,
what you were saying. Yeah.
Okay, so folks go back to in Act 1. They go back to calculating. So then I throw a curveball in there for all three groups. So for the PIs, I say, after you've made the calculations and your crew chief has made the hotel reservations and stuff is, getting ready to go, the day before, the client calls and says, hey, I got 5 more acres that's nearby. Can you please survey that too? When you've already got folks up there, they give no map. They give no other information besides, I got 5 acres. Also, I want you to survey. Once you're done with the big parcel, then go to this other smaller parcel. So the PI start making the calculations of like, well, dope, this is only a 5-acre area. And, we've already got a whole team up there. Let's just double the whole damn thing and make it be another day out there in the field, right? So they set to work under those parameters. I go to the crew chiefs and I tell them, all right, your curveball is there's someone who was just hired about 3 months ago. They just finished their PhD at an Ivy League school and they're a field tech on your crew. But the whole time they've ever been there for 3 weeks, they've just complained about everything. They've been complaining about the supervisors. They've been complaining about the company, about the survey methods, about how things are just not like what they learned in their PhD and how everyone's wrong. And they don't want to listen to anyone who doesn't have a PhD, which the crew chief doesn't have a PhD and has to take this person out there. And to make matters worse, they're wrong on every measurement. They don't know how to use a compass. They, never figure out any artifact identification. They just think that they're, a prima donna that's the best in the world and that everyone else is beneath them. And in the meeting before they go, the person is complaining about this project also and lets it go that they're pretty depressed that they're getting paid $38 an hour, even though they have a PhD, which is more than everyone else on the crew. And they're sitting there along with the other crew, and they're the ones complaining about how they get paid so little, even though they have a PhD, right? And then I tell the crew chief, you have to take this person out with you, and you're responsible for getting the project done, no matter how their behavior is out there. They're out there with you. They're part of the crew. So then I go to the techs and I tell them the same thing. I go, this person's here. They've only been here 3 weeks or 3 months. You've been here a year, and they're getting paid $38 an hour, and they complain about everything, and you got to carry them through every project. Oh, and by the way, every mistake they make, you have to fix. You need to fix all their mistakes to get this project done because you're the techs and you need to get it done. So then I stand back and watch the whole thing go after that. So they don't all know each other's curveballs. The PIs just set to work like, double the money for less work. Yes. They start making double calculations on everything because they're like, sweet, a whole nother day. That is going to make us like $10,000 more. Okay, so then the crew chiefs, it was amazing, the response, because in my experience, the response is not the same. They actually figured out that they needed to make some community guidelines for being on a crew and they tell the PIs that they've noticed some kind of bad morale among the people. And they think that if they can make several guidelines that include not slandering the company, not complaining, trying to actually improve yourself, listening and learning to other people on the crew, that this will improve the morale. And so they put this piece of paper together, and then they go and talk to the techs and go, look, we know this guy's a problem, but here's the thing, we want you all to sign this thing. And the PIs are like, yeah, sweet, as long as you get the project done, okay, cool, go ahead. But the minute they complain, that's grounds for a complaint, and then they can start moving towards dismissing that person, or they'll shut up and they'll actually get better. So I was like, man, that's amazing. I can't believe they thought of that. The techs were like, yeah, you know what? We're out of here. We quit. So we're not going out. We want $40 an hour.
Right.
We're not going out with that person. We're not fixing any problems. And if we don't get what we want, then, we're not getting benefits anyway. We're temp hires. We're out of here. We're just going to another company. I don't want to work with that guy. So then I was like, so crew chiefs, how are you going to get your crew to work? Is it going to just be you and the PhD that finishes the thing? Because it's not really possible for you to do it in 2 days. If it's just two of you, what are you going to do? So then they start talking about like, well, what do you really want? They're like, we don't want this person on the crew, man. We don't want this going on. We want a hotel. We want per diem. We want mini fridges. We want all that. And they're like, okay, let me see what I can do about that. So then after the whole thing starts degenerating and the crew chiefs decide, and some of the crew chiefs were actually super mad too. And they were like, you know what? I don't want to work here anymore. We need to get that person out of here. Like, I don't want to work for this company. So I let it go for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I say, okay, now what's going on here? And the crew chiefs are like, or the PIs are saying, hey, guess what? There's a whole other parcel. We're going to make more money, but you guys have to stay out for another day. Is that cool? The crew chiefs are like, yeah, everything's collapsing, man. We better figure this out. And then the techs are saying, we want way more money or we're out of here. So the PIs are like, well, what's the problem? And they go, this person right here, they're a problem. They don't work well. So the PIs are like, oh, that's the problem. Okay, well, then they're not coming with you. They're fired. It's like, whoa, that was fast. Like, yeah, that person's a problem. Okay, they're just off the crew. They're out of here. If they're causing problems and crying about the wages, they're out of here. How about we give you a $5 raise, techs, and we'll make sure the motel's in a good place and next to a bunch of food options and everything else. Is that cool?
Right.
Well, $5 raise. Okay, cool. So then they also talk to the crew chiefs and they go, look, thanks for bringing this to our attention. We really value you. Thank you for putting those community guidelines together. Hey, we're going to give you a $5 raise also, so you'll be making more than that PhD was before. And we really want to keep you on the crew, but don't tell the crew that you just got more money. Like, don't tell them that you're making $10 more than them. And then everybody goes back to taking care of business. Like, they go back to planning it and they feel like they've got everything under control. And then the final curveball I throw them is I go, hey, so as your guys get in the car and start driving to Northern California, the client calls and goes, hey, over the weekend, I was golfing with this dude who also owns property in the area. And he's got some friends from Louisiana. And he said his friends do cultural resources all the time and that company from Southern California is ripping you off. That there's this whole truckload of guys that'll drive from Louisiana for $15 an hour, no overhead, no nothing. You don't have to pay for a hotel or anything. And they'll take care of your CRM problem for only $15 an hour. And so why would I stay with you guys? Why am I going to pay more money when these dudes over here are going to do it for $15 an hour? And so then everybody's just kind of looking like, yeah, we're not going to be able to, like, if these kids won't even work for $30 an hour or 25, then 15 is like, we're never going to be able to compete with that. And the crew chiefs are kind of like, yeah, so I don't think so. And then someone was like, you know what? You should tell them that if they want to roll their dice on some dude that they just met at the golf course and have kids from $15 an hour drive all the way from Louisiana to San Francisco and survey this thing, if they want to risk their entire project's approval so that they can save a few $1,000s on someone from out of state who doesn't know what the hell they're doing, then we're not going to compete on that level. That's not what we're doing. And I was like, well, class is over. Good job. Put the ball back in their court, right? Like, yeah, sure. Yeah. We're not going to try to go down to $15 an hour. We can't do it. We'll go out of business. Like, we're just not going to do it.
Oh, this whole thing, that is genius, dude. I guess I have to take a break.
It was their responses. They're the ones who made it happen.
No, that's what's great. But I guess when we return, more on this genius Lord of the Flies moment.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos.
One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zaxby's Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
All right, we're back with the second act, talking about how archaeology projects go wrong. I mean, I think I was just astounded by the responses, because these are folks, this class is an undergrad class. The folks, they didn't even really know what CRM was in August. And by the end of September, they're already acting and showing a lot of the different characteristics that we see in a lot of companies. But I think Heather was going to help us out because, of course, this is like simulation in class. And Heather can actually give us more insight on how this unfolds in the real world.
Well, I think, first of all, your students' response is an indicator of how well the class is going, which pat on Bill's back. They're learning a lot, obviously. So, there's a few things that I think, like I kind of interjected early on where, there's some things that are not totally realistic in every situation, but that certainly could be. I mean, you have these small company people, like, recently I've had somebody reach out and was asking about starting a CRM company. They haven't even worked in CRM yet. And, that's, I think if anybody's considering doing that, you really do need to work in the business first, because you have no idea, like you're really going to shoot yourself in the foot. So there are some things here that could definitely go in that direction if the principal investigators are not that savvy on a business end and have not been in CRM for a while. So I definitely think that those are potentials. But a few things that just popped out of my head, because I was like, oh my gosh, I got to start writing these things down because I'm forgetting them. But one is that before you're going in the field, you're writing a proposal. I just want people to understand that unless, of course, there's CRM companies that don't know what they're doing, but all this is figured out prior to going out in the field. And generally, it's figured out by the principal investigator or the PM. I shouldn't even say principal investigator, because principal investigator can be a PM, can be a project manager with management skills, but they could also just be the person who is Secretary of Interior qualified, who's able to create a research design, a work plan. They're not looking at the business side. They're just making sure that the work is done at standards or above level.
Yeah.
So, the principal, and I just want to make sure people understand that just because you have a principal investigator does not mean that person is a PM. Sometimes you have another level that's a PM. And sometimes in some companies, it's not even an archaeologist who's the PM. It's another analyst of some sort, right? Maybe a NEPA analyst or a CEQA in California, CEQA analyst, who is the PM. But generally, the archaeologist really should be writing the proposals, and it should be somebody who has some business sense.
Yeah, and I also had a question about the name of calling them crew chiefs, right? Because field director felt more natural, but then I just kind of reverted back, right? So do we call them crew chiefs anymore, or is it just field director? Okay,
no, we do.
Got it.
I think it just depends on the company and how, or in our company, it just depends on who you're talking to. Some people call them field directors. Some people call them crew chiefs. Okay. I don't think that it really matters. And sometimes if you have a really large project, you can have a field director and then you can have crew chiefs because you have multiple crews on one project. So now you have more stratification.
Okay. Yeah. Right? Yeah, and I knew about the project director thing, and I didn't know if it should be the difference between owner or principal investigator. I didn't know.
It could be both.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because a smaller CRM company Your owner is your PM many times, right? They're the ones that are making the managerial decisions and money decisions because they know bottom line. So the overhead is important. And this is something I know I've talked ad nauseum on other shows about, but the overhead of a company is really important to the finances and creating a work plan that can work as far as fiscally. It depends. Not all companies are the same. Some companies have higher overhead than others. And so they're able to charge less, or some companies, their hands are tied, they have to charge more. But why would they charge more? And why would the client go with somebody who charges more? Because that person, let's say that larger company is a one-stop shop. It saves the client money and time. They don't have to go around and find an archaeologist, find a biologist, find this person. They just hire a environmental company and they take care of all technical scopes. Or sometimes a project is you're doing an environmental document and maybe this is the case in this that you're talking about, a resource is found and now you have to send a crew out. So generally it's done by the same company if they have a cultural practice that is involved with the project to begin with. So those are some things that I was thinking about, is that hopefully you work for a company where all these things are already answered and a field director, crew chief is not having to answer these basic budgetary questions. However, it does happen that the crew chief is in charge of making sure that everybody has hotels and everything. The other thing that I had is this concept of equal pay. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because that could be a whole other show, but a crew chief should get paid more than the techs. They just should. If you're out on that project and you're all doing the same thing, everybody's walking, everybody's digging, everybody's doing, from just a cursory look, is doing the same thing. But the crew chief has a completely different level of responsibility than the techs do. The techs show up and they dig and they walk and they record and that's it. The chief then has to take all that information. If something goes wrong, they have the skill set to be able to switch the strategy, your work plan, if something comes up that you weren't expecting. These are all things that you're paying for the skill set of that individual to be able to handle something that comes along so that your project doesn't get too squirrely. So the concept that a tech should be making the same as a crew chief is, to me, not valid.
Right. I think that's, yeah.
And then
that seems bad.
So the PhD guy, geez.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, that's a critical piece of this entire exercise, right?
That's critical. But that's everything I'm saying is not to say this stuff does not happen. It does happen.
Oh yeah.
I just want to make sure that people know, because it makes me sad when people come in. I think this is important for students to have this critical mindset and to understand, but they can't go in thinking that every company is there to screw them. Because first of all, their career is going to go awry if they do that. Yeah. And they're going to be miserable people. But the PhD, I could see some reasons why I would do this, why I would have a PhD come out in the field. Let's say they just started and we want them as a research archaeologist. So what we're doing is we want to have them do the ethnography, the background sections in reports, but we still want them to have an experience in the field and really understand and have respect for. So the purpose could be a good purpose. Like as a PI, I'm like, you know what? This is an opportunity for this guy to really understand what it really is like to get this stuff done. So they have a respect for the crews out in the field. They understand this. We do this with health and safety officers. We do this with non-archaeologists who are PMs, environmental analysts, to get them to understand how hard it is in the field. So they have a respect for our field techs and our crew chiefs. So I could see a good reason why you would put a PhD out there. But if the guy already has an attitude, that's like, unfortunate, unless you're trying to knock his ego down a little bit, his or her ego down a little bit. And that's the purpose of putting him out there. But you have to let your crew chief know that So I don't think it happens all that often. But if sometimes there is a good reason to put a PhD guy.
Yeah, no, this happens a lot is all there really is to it. Because I think it happens a lot more than folks want to admit, because I think a lot of companies do want that archaeologist to be a research archaeologist or to be, a project manager or, rise up higher. And so they're rolling the dice on someone who has zero experience outside of their PhD. And, they want them to learn how to do field work. They want them to get to the point where they can supervise crews, and they want them to be there for a long time. Like they're investing for the long term. And I think a lot of times people come out and they've been fed a lot of stories about how tenure track's the only dream. Like if you don't get tenure track, you're a loser. Like all these problems they've internalized, and how they've, they went into a PhD a lot of times with the explicit goal, I'm going to be a professor and this is what I'm going to do. And who cares about the odds? It'll all work out for me. But then when they need to feed themselves, they go to cultural resources. And so they do have a chip on their shoulder a lot of times where they show up and they've got a PhD. And that's why I added the Ivy League piece in there too in California, right? Because California doesn't really have Ivy League schools. So you're talking about someone who is totally used to being in that really privileged environment, and they show up in Southern California and now they're doing a cultural resources job, and they're not even actually in charge of it. They're actually one of the crew, and it's a huge ego blow, and not everybody knows how to handle that.
Right.
It's a similar circumstance as I have a PhD and I'm not making any money, so I have to go to Starbucks. I have to start working at Starbucks. I'm going to walk in and have an attitude that I have a PhD, therefore you have to treat me differently than all the other Starbucks employees. I mean, it really is similar because it's so far different.
Yeah.
Just because you're an archaeologist and everybody else is an archaeologist doesn't mean your skill set's the same. It's not the same. And if you were trying to get a tenure track, your dissertation, your graduate research, all of that is not aimed towards CRM archaeology. It's aimed towards academic archaeology. So it's like apples and oranges.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate. It shouldn't be that way. But I do have to say that, that first segment, Bill, that was like the Andrew Kinkella life story. Like I've experienced all of that, like 100%.
Yeah, I also have too.
Yeah, that whole kind of Kobayashi Maru, like the no-win scenario, the sort of the slow destruction of the CRM crew, the factionalization, like all that stuff. I hope that every student in CRM listens to this and takes your setup, super seriously. And kind of like Heather was saying, I'm not here to say that happens every time. That was not my experience every time, but I've definitely experienced everything that Bill brought up to 100%.
Yes.
Yeah. Each of those, I know those people. Like I know them. So I just want everybody to know that. I mean, I trained them
close. In the case of the PhDs who come in with a chip on their, I'm the one who trained them,
right,
and kept them from getting fired because their success depended on me putting diapers on my kid.
I know.
And I couldn't let one person's chip on their shoulder derail this entire thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I had to find a way to get the text to work, and also for this person who knows nothing to actually just learn stuff so that we could get the job done.
Yeah, I had a
PhD. I mean, that guy's got it. That's an attitude problem. That's a personality problem that isn't just going to rear its ugly head in the field. It's going to rear its ugly head in every aspect of CRM if a company keeps that guy. Not to say that they don't.
But I mean, it was amazingly how the students were like, okay, that's the problem, and all I got to do is just get rid of them. Sweet. Yeah. And then I was like, well, if you get rid of them, then you're down one person. They're like, we don't care. We don't care. 4 can do the job. It might take longer. It might be more difficult. But if by getting rid of this person they don't like saves the project, they're gone. And so I think that's a lot of other PhDs. They get in there and they can't hang. And then all of a sudden they're not working there anymore. They've separated. They've left. They've gone to another place. Yeah. Well, it could be a company that's toxic, or it could be the fact that you think that you're bigger and better than you are, and you couldn't hang in CRM.
And you're a cancer. You've created a cancer.
For your own self, right? Yes. Because if that person had walked in with a PhD and had been willing to learn and listen for this person's been here 2 years and done 1 million projects, right? Those other techs, they know how to find new jobs. They know how to scramble. They know how to survive in hotel rooms. Like if they had really opened their eyes and ears and listened and paid attention and took advice, they would have ended up being at the very top of the heap with a bunch of experience, with a bunch of people who knew what they were doing. Because they have a PhD, right? They're willing to learn. there's no upper limit on a PhD in archaeology, right? So once you'd learned and once you'd become a good citizen and a good colleague, then you're like a total asset, right? Then you can go to bat for the crew. Then you can, help everyone else out when they promote you to higher levels. But if you show up with a chip on your shoulder and think it's beneath you, even though you're getting paid more money than everybody else, that's not good.
You know what, though? That happens at every level. It happens with MAs.
Well, yeah, I can see that happen.
It happens with seasoned techs, with BAs. I mean, a jerk is a jerk.
Yeah.
An egotist is an egotist.
You are right about that.
It's unfortunately not uncommon. And with that double negative, we'll see you guys on the flip side.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
All right, welcome back. We're in the third segment of our conversation about how field projects go wrong in the field based on a class exercise that, I think it went quite well. I appreciate Heather giving us a lot of clarity because they put the assignment together in a few hours, and it actually turned out, better than a lot of other things that I've spent days and days doing.
Isn't that the truth, though, so much on that? I mean, it's just genius comes.
If only I could recreate this for the other, 16 weeks, I'd be gold.
That happens in my world too, though. Sometimes under pressure.
Yeah, there's that energy there. I think that's so great. I will say, back to that first segment. I mean, I had my mic turned off a lot just because I was laughing because it was hitting so close to home. I'm like, I can't. What can I say? This is so close. The other thing I would say is in terms of projects that go south like that. In my personal experience, I've been on projects, I've gotten hired later where I could feel that stuff already happened. You know what I mean? Like you get hired on the project and you can tell an atom bomb went off like 2 weeks prior because your pay is good, where you're staying is good. It seems almost too good to be true. And then once you're on the project, they're like, oh yeah, you should have been here 2 weeks ago. You're like, oh. So the setup that Bill has given to his students, there can be that aftermath of things can get better. So that was just an experience I had. And I know that, Bill, you wanted to bring up what some of the field techs in the exercise said. Yeah,
because, the exercise was, it was also, there was points involved too, right? So like when it's a graded assignment, every week in the lab thing, there's some kind of assignment and it's always worth some points. So folks were not just, there was incentive to not just turn on TikTok and just sit there, right? So this was their assignment for that day. And also a lot of people were really interested in it because this is folks that want to do archaeology. They're going to graduate and they're thinking about going into archaeology. And this is sadly, yet again, one of the first classes that's ever really talked about cultural resources. So this is their first real time that anyone centered that as a topic of, learning. And so they're realizing, wow, this could be a real career, but wow, it's like every other career. It's not going to just fall into my lap. It's complicated. And so the PIs most of their time was spent doing the calculations for the budget, right? So they were going to send this on to the client. The crew chiefs, most of their time was spent figuring out how the heck this is even going to work. And then when they throw in the extra 5 acres, they're kind of like, well, we don't even know what to expect with that. Like, we can only plan for this other part, but this additional thing, we have no map, no idea where it's at. Like, I don't even know, what to do. So they really were focused on other kind of like mechanical issues, but the field techs, because they were, kind of out of the decision-making loop, their questions had a lot to do with like their work conditions. And so when I was talking to them as they were working through, once they realized that they were going to get whatever pay rate and they agreed to do the job and stuff, they had a lot of questions about like health and safety out in the field. For the first time, someone had ever really asked, like, do we do background checks on the people who are working with us in the field? And I didn't really have a response to that. It's been a long time since I worked in CRM as a, full-time job. So yeah, in academia, there's total background checks to figure out. And I took a training that was talking about level of checks that we do for professors that are coming in. And so, yeah, at a certain point when we're getting ready to offer a job to a professor, there is an evaluation from your previous employer. They look into your, your conduct and stuff. And so those kind of things about harassment, discrimination and stuff, that it's more likely to find that for a professor than it is for a cultural resources. And I was kind of like, we don't really do background checks. And then they had a lot of questions about like, health and safety regarding them working with people they've never worked with. Like, how do they know they're going to be safe in the field with other people? And I'm kind of like, I don't have any response. I've worked on crews before where I was the only one who didn't have a handgun. And I was like, man, that's against the rules and all this other stuff. I'm the only one out here that doesn't have one. And that's been my thing. How do I know if those folks are going to use them or like what's going on, right? So that's like I never really thought about that kind of stuff. Not necessarily that gun owners are going to just start, shooting wild like Yosemite Sam, but you never know if the thing could discharge in the truck or like if they're safe around it. Like you never really know. Same thing with knives. You never really know if someone's safe with a knife or a machete or something like that. These are tools that we've had before. I never really thought about whether, someone was going to do something with that. But the other thing had questions about like, benefits in healthcare. And I was kind of like at the field tech level, if you're a permanent hire for the company, that's your best chance to have healthcare. But if you get hurt out there and, you're probably on your own for insurance. Most techs are on their own for insurance. And so the students are kind of like, like you can see their wheels already turning like, well, then I got to get to the crew chief level. That's all I got to do so I can get benefits and higher wages and like all this other stuff. But, that they had a lot of questions and I didn't have answers. Maybe folks here, you have answers on background checks or safety or any of those other things.
Yeah, I'll say, of course, I can only speak from my own experience. I'm sure that there are plenty of companies that don't. I would think in this day and age, I would hope just to protect themselves that they would do some kind of level of a background check. When we hire people, we do a background check. I don't, it's a really good question. I don't know if we do it for as needed. I think we do, but I think it's like a cursory one. For full-time, I think it's more robust. That's, I believe, the case. Background checks are expensive. It depends on how companies look at as needed. If they're just always rotating as needed all the time, as needs meaning you're just hiring people for one project or they're on call for you or whatever. Maybe they don't do a thorough background check every time. I would hope they do. But with that said, as far as getting hurt on the job, if you get hurt on the job, that is workers' compensation. You should be cared for in that way. If the injury is based on something that happens in the field, but again, that's something that you need to report. So if you get hurt in the field, you have to let people know that. We actually were just discussing recently, our health and safety division, we were discussing within our, project leaders, we were talking about how, you have some of these injuries that happen over the period of someone's career, bad backs, bad knees, things like that. Where does it, who's responsible for it if you are an as-needed employee? That's a little trickier. But now that's where our health and safety department is saying, listen, you need to really stress to those that are in the field that if you are not feeling well, we would rather catch this now before you go out in the field and hurt yourself more so. And is it because they care about the employees? Yes. It's also from a practical perspective, because if you send people out that are already not feeling well, and then you send them out, now the liability is even greater for the company because now something actually does happen while they're in the field. So if, let's say, they kind of twisted their ankle dancing the night before and they come in because they need the money, or they're coming in because they don't want to be that one person that calls in the morning of and says, I'm not feeling well. And now that you're short a person on the team, but they push through and say they're going to go anyway. And then they end up like totally twisting their ankle and ripping, ligaments or whatever. That is a liability. You're looking at it from a short-sighted perspective of just pushing through, which actually many times can just propagate injuries that cost the company even more. So for as needed, typically you don't have the full benefits. just like most companies. You're not going to go in and work for a company for a week and get full benefits. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you have to it takes a while just to get benefits going. The full-time employees, you should be getting benefits. Yes. I mean, I can't imagine a company these days not giving benefits to a full-time employee.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I have not had, I have not worked for an employer. I'm not even going to comment on my current employer, but I've never worked for an employer that was like, yeah, we need to take care of the health of the field crew or any of our employees because they're like, a valuable asset. It's only been, we have health and safety regs so that you don't sue us when you get cancer from breathing in, chemicals from the site that we're having you dig, or, we've decided not to sift sediments that have arsenic in them, not because we don't want to find the artifacts, but because we think you might get sick after that whole thing happens. So I haven't been in a situation where they super cared about the health and safety. I mean, stuff like wilderness first aid and CPR and stuff. A lot of times I had to pay for that myself, and I had to go and find those classes and do that stuff myself. Right. And so like when it comes to some of these health and safety things, the crew chief plays like an important role, because I've only worked for companies where it was just like end on budget, don't go over, or they were really small and they were friendly and everything, but they just didn't really have those kind of health and safety mechanisms. But the bigger corporate companies, they did not care about our health and safety. They just didn't want us to get hurt at work, that it could directly be connected to them.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, for me, because I've worked for smaller companies, I've worked for larger companies, I work for a medium-sized company right now. And I would say I feel more protected with a larger, medium-sized company than a small company. Not because the small companies like screw the workers, but because they're not savvy enough. They don't have a dedicated team that is putting together trainings. We have we have, I would say, probably 100 trainings, different types of trainings that during the year, emails are sent out to everybody that works for us and saying, we need you to take this training. Right now, it's like a heat-related training or valley fever training. We have all these separate trainings based on where people are working that we require that they take them. And now, is it because they care? They're humans. Yes. I mean, you don't have robots working in human resources as much as I think some people think there are robots.
Yeah.
But these are human beings. They do care about people. I've worked with many different safety officers. They really do care. And that's their whole job, is to make sure that people are safe. But from a practical perspective, you're absolutely right. They're making sure they limit the liability of the company. Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because if a health and safety officer is looking at it and saying, wait a minute, I want to make sure that we don't have people getting injured in the field, because if they get injured in the field, it's going to be on us to pay all the workers' comp and and our safety rating goes down. All these things, they're trying to prevent those things. Those are good things. Those laws are there to protect, and the health and safety managers are there to make sure that they're followed so that the company is protected. That's a good thing. It's not just an emotional thing. It's an emotional thing. Yeah. There's no regulations. So I think that honestly, a larger company is going to have their act together more so than a smaller company. I'm sure there are small companies out there that really do know. And you know what? There's small companies that may care, but they may not even have the tools or know how to protect their employees.
Yeah, I think that was my experience at the smaller companies, that they did care about us and they didn't want us to get hurt, and they did everything they could to keep us safe, but they didn't really have like safety officers and stuff. So it wasn't, it was kind of up to folks, and they were down if you wanted to get the training with helping you get it, and they would pay all the money for all that stuff, but they just really didn't, there wasn't a comprehensive plan.
Sure.
Whereas other companies, man, I'm telling you, the ones that were like, I don't know how big Dudek is, but I've been at companies that seriously would tell techs, it's less expensive for me to get more shovels than it is for me to get you, right? Like, you're as disposable as a shovel. You're just the tool I use to dig my site. Like, literally tell people that, what are you complaining about? Because within, one email, I can get someone to replace you. So just go ahead and go. And I mean, I've seen it happen in the field. I've heard it happen before too. And so I think
it's an ignorant perspective. And it's stupid. It's not practical.
Yeah.
It's not right on a moral level, but it's also not practical, because if you do that, you're pushing people. And next thing you know, you're going to have all these injuries in the field. They're going to cost the company money and cost the company opportunities for large projects, because when their safety rating goes down, because they have, I mean, all these go on the record.
Yeah, well, they don't all go on the record, but all I'm saying is, like, you'll end up in the situation where we're at today, where you can't find anyone to be an archaeologist because there's no, like, they haven't taken care of people's careers or livelihood. And every, you know, I get these emails like, be part of my panel about, you know, helping me figure out, you know, how to, you know, can you train more people in university to help them go into archaeology? Because I can't find people. And I'm shaking my head like, dude, if I do that and they go and work because I already know your company, you're going to just grind them down and flame them out and treat them like trash, and they're going to move on and do something else. Like, so I already know that's the pathway for seriously more than half of people. I've worked for those companies. I quit those companies, right? That's how I got to where I'm at, because I worked at those companies and left them.
Yet again, Bill, you and I have the same origin story. I've had that exact same experience, and that stuff lasts. You know, like my experiences, my negative experiences with certain CRM firms, even 20 years ago, I'm like, they are on my blacklist. Even today, like with my students, I'm like, nah, I wouldn't work over there. You know, and so that stuff lasts basically forever. And people who get a little bit of power, like Bill or I in the academic world, we can really hurt them ultimately. And they deserve it. So, you know,
there are companies. I've seen companies. I've heard and I've experienced it back when I was not in a full-time position. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It absolutely happens. But I do think that just because I think overall you're safer at a medium, or at least a company that has a dedicated health and safety department, because that's their entire job. Especially now, there's degrees on health and safety, and they're being taught the right things. It's not just, you know, keep the nose clean of the company. But I do think that we should do podcasts just on how do people starting in the CM world, or even midway through, how do they vet a company? How do they look at a company, and how do you determine whether or not this company is going to be there to protect you? Yeah,
that's huge. I love that idea. That's huge.
Yeah.
And well, like, you know, I know we're at time, but the field techs came to the question of, well, is there anyone who's really looking out for field techs? And I was just thinking, you all end up looking out for each other through your own networks and everything. And then they were, you know, the class was over, but they're kind of like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the kind of thing that, you know, unions would be useful for. And I go, yeah, exactly. Because you're skilled workers that they can't accomplish this job without. You need to have these degrees. You need to have this experience. And so you kind of do have some kind of leverage if you could put it together. But we were out of class time. And of course, you know, we're out of time here on the podcast. We've talked about unions before, but they were kind of like, I think that this is the kind of thing a union would help with. And I was like, yeah, well, go ahead and hit it.
Well, in the meantime, though, I definitely think, I mean, I think unions are, if they do happen, are far off. They're certainly not going to help the people that are going into the CRM world now. And so they need to have an understanding of what are they going to look at? What are they looking for when they're working for a company, so they don't end up in a bad spot?
Yeah. And, you know, crew chiefs really do need to look out for their crew, because they're not just a handmaiden to help the people at the top, you know, make money. They really, they have a high level of power, because if you think about it, they're the ones who have the power to execute this thing, and they're the make or break. And they also have a lot of incentive on having everything go well, because they're, you know, managers. Like, they're the principal investigators and the project managers of tomorrow. And, you know, learning those kind of skills, learning that ability to manage people and manage expectations and handle these kind of things that are complicated, like someone who's getting paid more than you, who doesn't want to listen to you and doesn't even like you because you don't have a PhD. Nevertheless, you have things you have to do. So that's a huge thing, and it's a learning lesson, and it's a human experience. So I got to give it up to those folks in the middle, and got to give them up to the folks, you know, that care, like you're talking about at the top, because there's not enough people at the top that really do care. I feel like things are kind of changing now, since they're like running out of Americans to do work, you know, U.S. citizens to do work. And they're like, well, it takes many years to train someone. Well, you universities aren't training them. And I'm kind of like, yeah, well, you companies haven't taken care of all the product we've trained for, years and years. So, what do we expect? And then there's companies like yours where people probably leave slowly and you hire slowly and you manage and there's a few companies that are like that. They really take care of their employees and they do the right thing. But, I just thought it was a good exercise. And I teach an entire graduate course, 16 weeks on cultural resources, where they have to fill out an RFP. And we spend a lot of time talking about all this kind of stuff, whole weeks. Then we'll talk about health and safety and budgeting and project design and proposaling and stuff. But this was like a crash course in 3 hours. Pretty interesting to see how it all unfolded.
I think it was
it's great.
Just great.
Right.
And I would say my last comment would be that, however you think about unions, or like I said, they're not here. So take care of each other. Keep your network. When you are going through school, for those that are going through school now, or if you're in the beginning of your career, have a notepad and take down the numbers and the contact and the emails of every person that you work with, because those that are working in as needed, that's your list, that's your group, those are your people to help you figure out, is this a good company? Let's say you have an opportunity with the company. Is this a good idea? Are you going to be protected? Do they treat their employees right? Do they treat their as neededs right? So just make sure that you keep your network. You are not an island. You're not on an island. Use each other. Even though, let's say you don't have a union, you still can be in union with each other.
All right. And with that, watch this segue, dude. Thanks to everyone. I'm saying this off the top of my head, dude. You can tell. Thanks to everyone for joining us this week. And thanks also to the listeners for tuning in. And we'll see you in the field.
Bye, Andrew. See you next time.
Bye, Bill.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Andrew, that was impressive.
Yeah, good job.
So good.
Don't read the screen.
Oh, wait, Heather, did you say bye?
I said bye.
Yeah,
yes.
good. Dude, we all
kind of
did it.
said bye.
It's great.
Yeah.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.